This is part two of my series going through a debate dialogue I had with Aron Ra a couple of years ago. So after I'll by the way, I'll link the part one below. But after part one, that section that we looked at in the first video, there's some back and forth about the concept of worldview. I attempt to explain what the concept means, and meanwhile, Aron says A, he doesn't have a worldview, and B, he's not even clear what I mean by worldview. So I try to give a clear definition of that. I don't find that there's about 5 minutes of that's particularly worthwhile looking at. What I do want to look at is how I talk about Christianity or Christian theism and naturalism as samples of two contrasting worldviews. And then Aaron gives a particular response. And I want to start and play a clip that shows his response and then my reply to that response. And then we'll debrief. So I just completed here my quick summary of the contrast between Christian theism and naturalism. Aaron now is going to give his response.
Now, I would proffer a slightly different version. I mean, what I've always heard for naturalism, and this is from the religious people that are arguing against me from whatever stripe they are, whether they're young earth creationists or what they call serious theologians or whatever they identify themselves to be. They always criticize me for believing in naturalism, which I think is ridiculous because I think we both accept that there is a natural universe, and the theist is trying to posit in addition to that they want to posit an additional of a supernatural, maybe not alternative reality, but supplemental reality at least. And so I think we both agree that most of the time we both agree that there is a natural world. And so I'm not believing in that. I mean, I'm just accepting, as Hume said, I don't have a choice. I have to make the same assumptions that a baby or a beast would in that regard, that there is a reality, because it's literally madness. You cannot operate in it without that. I'm just not assuming the supernatural, which I identify with magic. I mean, everything that is traditionally said to be supernatural you could equally say that it's magical. And so I'm not assuming. Naturalism only means not assuming magic.
Okay. What you're describing there, I think, is you're expositing to me aspects of your worldview, right? So that you understand, you believe everything is natural, and that anything that is not natural would be properly defined as magic, and you don't believe there is any magic. So that's all part of your worldview.
That's
I'll just note that, so I kind of cut it off there, but Aaron was just coming back and saying essentially that's pretty close what I just articulated as a representation for what his views are. And that is important. It's important to accurately represent people's views and understand them. We don't want to have, like, when you're in a debate or a dialogue, two ships passing in the night, people don't really understand what the other is saying. They're strawmanning, caricaturing, misrepresenting. And then it's just a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. You want to understand what other people's position is before you're going to say anything else. That's the foundation, right? It's like when you build a home, you have to have a foundation. And the foundation here is going to be minimally mutual comprehension, understanding what the other is saying in the first place. And so I wanted definitely to get that out of the way. Another thing I just want to note here as a footnote is you saw Aaron talk about young earth creationists, and then people, Christians or theologians, theists who don't accept young earth creationism, and he refers to them as serious theologians. And it's pretty clear from his intonation there that he's contemptuous of these people. Now, of course, I have a PhD in systematic theology from King's College, University of London. So Aaron would have presumably that same contempt for me as a serious theologian as he would to others. And I think that others being like young earth creationists. And I think what we have there, sorry, this is Tim Bitts, always usually sitting on my lap when I do videos, and it's getting very painful. But I think what we have there is the representation of Aaron's plausibility structure. Everybody, just as I'm going to say, everybody has a worldview. Everybody has a plausibility structure that's intimately tied to their worldview. And their plausibility structure is going to predispose them to finding certain truth claims to be plausible or credible, and others to be implausible or uncredible, lacking in credibility. And so if you are a naturalist, then the idea that there is a specialized discourse of theology which has some specific subject matter, you may have some degree of skepticism about it. You will find it very implausible, or you'll be incredulous to it. And that is a reflection of your plausibility framework or your plausibility structure. Whereas if you are a Christian or some other theist or supernaturalist, you're going to find much more credible that there is this field of discourse called theology. And one important thing to keep in mind there is that there's no neutral stance here. Now, Aron's going to want to argue that there is a neutral stance, but I don't think there is. I think everybody has a worldview, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But by default, that is a position that you have with a plausibility structure that goes with it, through which you screen prima facie the credibility of various truth claims about the nature of the world. You're assessing new truth claims based upon what you already believe to be true. Kind of ground zero. I was hoping that we would have quicker agreement on this basic point. Instead, we ended up going back and forth on it for 7 or 8 minutes. So I didn't want to allow the debate to get derailed, but such as it is. So that was some of the back and forth there. Okay, so then Aron, I've laid out Christianity and theism. He offers his reply after the serious theologians comment. And his reply is, well, I just think that there's like one reality, the reality that we see, and you being me, Randall, I also accept that there's this reality out there, the natural world. The problem for the supernaturalist is they posit something additional to that. And Aron says that's magic. A couple things to note here at the outset when we're thinking about that. So the first thing is to say that the way he's setting up what naturalism is on his view is that the naturalist doesn't have any special burden to argue for anything. The naturalist is simply recognizing that reality exists. And the theist or the supernaturalist is the person who goes beyond reality as it is manifested to us and says there's some additional thing. So that's the first thing, that the theist or the supernaturalist on Aron's account has a burden to argue or defend their claims, but the naturalist doesn't because they're just simply defaulting to what exists. The second thing to note is, of course, the use of his word magic. This ties back, first of all, again, to the idea of a plausibility structure framework, that he's simply using language um, to present or frame his own incredulity toward an opposing view, that anything beyond nature would be magic. And here, magic is a way of expressing incredulity, perhaps contempt, and rhetorically, refer to it as magic serves as a poison pill for discourse. Because if something is magic on this account, it's not to be taken as intellectually serious. So if you already frame it as magic, you're undercutting the likelihood that others will be willing to consider seriously the option of the supernaturalist because what they believe has already been labeled as magic. And this would lead me to something else important that you want to avoid if you want to be credible, if you want to be uh, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, apply the golden rule to discourse. Try to avoid using poison pills that preclude the possibility of an opposing view being true, that prevent one seriously considering it as intellectually credible, which are simply born of your plausibility framework, precisely because you would not want others to do that to your position, to dismiss it and frame it by simply using a poison pill of rhetorical disregard or contempt. Okay, now in terms of the definition of naturalism that Aron gives, again, on the view that I gave a couple different definitions of naturalism in the clip that I'm not showing you. One of those definitions is the view that says a hypothetically completed natural science would offer a unified account of all reality. That's a that's one type of naturalism, which ties naturalism to scientific knowledge or inquiry. It's, in other words, scientism. It's a type of scientism which treats natural science as the ultimate way to know all reality and all truth claims. And that is one version of naturalism that many naturalists have held. Aron's view, I already said, is different. It's sort of a phenomenological view that says just whatever we experience in terms of nature, that's all that the naturalist says there is. But the supernaturalist or theist says there's something additional. Now, think about this analogically to being like in a one-story home. And if you stand outside of the home, from the naturalist perspective at least, stand outside of the home, there's no second floor visible, and certainly no windows above the first floor windows. And when you go into the house, there's no stairs leading upstairs to a second level. So it's reasonable to conclude then, hey, all I'm saying exists is that which is visibly present to us, manifested to us, which is the first floor of the home. But then the supernaturalist or the theist comes along and says, no, there is an additional second level. And that's like Aron's view of what naturalism is versus supernaturalism, that the naturalist has no special burden. The naturalist and supernaturalist are both living on the first floor of nature. The supernaturalist is positing that there is some second floor as well, but they've got no grounds or evidence to believe that. And so all the burden of proof is on the supernaturalist to explain why they think there's some second floor. The naturalist has no burden of proof because they're just dissenting common sense that they're experiencing the world of nature or the first floor of the house, and there is no need to posit anything more. That is certainly a way of thinking about naturalism, which is going to favor Aron, because it means that he doesn't have any burden of proof to establish anything, but it really misrepresents what the actual dynamic is here. The actual dynamic is that people who do posit some kind of non-naturalism or supernaturalism, and by the way, I do think in some respects the term non-naturalist is preferred to supernaturalist precisely because the term supernaturalist has also often been subjected to that poison pill of discourse, equivalent in the minds of many to magic. We're not necessarily saying something is quote unquote supernatural in any particular way to critique naturalism. All we're saying is naturalism is not explanatorily sufficient or metaphysically sufficient to account for the nature of reality. So there needs to be something apart from naturalism. Hence, you could adopt the more neutral term of non-naturalism. And the non-naturalist or supernaturalist believes there are all sorts of aspects to reality which do have to be explained and which are better explained by positing a second level to the house. So, for example, if there was evidence, for example, that in the ceiling there was a place where there would be a drop down staircase. There's evidence for that visibly in the ceiling. That would be a reason to posit. Well, in fact, that is best explained by the fact that there is a second level to get up to. And then let's say that you hear footsteps above your head and you hear murmuring in the rafters above your head. That would be evidence that there is a second floor. Let's say you go out of the house and see that even though maybe there are no windows above the first level, there is nonetheless an extended space above the first floor of about 10 or 15 feet. Well, that's good evidence to think that posit that there is in fact a second level, even if you can't get to it. Those would be examples why one person might think, you know what, we need to posit a second level above and beyond the first level. And this means that both naturalists and supernaturalists um, are neither is a neutral position. Each one is trying to explain the full set of data. Uh, so we have what is called an explanandum, and an explanandum is something that has to be explained, and an explanans is the thing that explains the explanandum. So if you have something in the ceiling that looks like a drop-down staircase, that's an explanandum. Why is that there? One explanation for why it's there, or one explanans for why it's there, is that there is in fact a second level to the house. That is the kind of dynamic that we're dealing with in terms of why someone is a supernaturalist versus a naturalist. So when it comes to the perspective of a supernaturalist or non-naturalist perspective, some of the things that might compel people to take that perspective, they believe there is evidence for consciousness that is non-reducible to physical states. They might believe there's such a thing as intentionality, or there may be evidence of out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, or religious experience, or abstract objects. There are all sorts of things that have been countenanced by philosophers and other people, which do not seem to be reducible to or explicable wholly in terms of a one level house or a naturalist worldview. Rather, there's a reason from the perspective of those individuals, at least, to posit a second level. And that is a much more appropriate and I think fair understanding of how to view the difference between naturalism and supernaturalism or non naturalism. Now, here's the thing. In my response, I didn't talk about any of that. And there's a reason for that. Because this is supposed to be a topic, a debate topic, focusing on how to understand the Bible and biblical violence. And we've already been derailed by debating whether there's such a thing as a worldview and whether Aron has a worldview. We've been derailed by that for 7 or 8 minutes. And I did want to get the debate back on track. So it's always important when you're doing a debate to be keeping in mind so you don't go down a rabbit trail endlessly. What are we here to discuss really? And then try to bring it back to that topic as quickly and expeditiously as possible. And I was attempting to do that. Now, note one last thing. That one way that that I did want to make one simple point, which I thought for the opening conversation was the most important point to make. And that is that there is such a thing as a worldview, and Aron does have a worldview. And so I said, look, you just articulated your view that there is just one reality, which is like one level, nature, and anything positive beyond that is magic. And there's no such thing as magic. In fact, it's all just nature. That is a worldview. And I got Aron to concede, but essentially that is his perspective. So that is definitely a view of the world. It is a view of the fundamental nature of reality and knowledge, what we can know about it. It is a worldview. And so I got that much. And we're only 8 minutes in the debate. So the fact that I already got him to concede that he does have a worldview, I think is significant because now we can have a conversation about how different people with different worldviews are going to approach the biblical text.